My name is Maya Chen. I am 36 years old. 19 days before my younger brother's wedding, his assistant forwarded me an email from him containing 5 conditions. If I wanted a chair at the ceremony, I had to withdraw my financial dispute against him, sign a joint ownership release on our grandfather's mountain property, contribute $20,000 to the wedding fund, execute a non-disclosure agreement covering all family business matters, and deliver a spoken tribute at the reception praising his character and crediting him with holding the family together. At the bottom of the message, Ryan had added a note in his own words. "These are not requests, Maya. Meet them or don't come." I read the email twice. The signature packet was attached, with a deadline of the following Friday at noon. They assumed the deadline would produce compliance. Instead, it produced clarity. I typed 3 words, pressed send, booked a cabin in Aspen for the wedding weekend, and called a shipping company about one final package. The box looked like something appropriate for a groom who had built his wedding into a 320-person display of everything he wanted people to believe about him. What was inside, however, was something he had spent the better part of 2 years making certain would never be found. I knew he would open it publicly because he had personally designed a segment called the Family Tribute Hour into the reception schedule, during which selected relatives would present meaningful gifts in front of the full guest list and a live stream audience. What my brother did not know was that my gift contained no card, no money, and no tribute. It contained a transaction timeline, a voice recording, and one loan document bearing a signature that matched mine in every technical detail, but had never touched my hand. Before I tell you what happened when that box reached the table, tell me something. What time is it where you are right now? Where are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The first person I need to tell you about is my brother. His name is Ryan, and he is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, Ryan was the one our parents worked hardest to explain. His failures were described as temporary situations requiring family patience. His successes he owned entirely and without hesitation. He was quick at making strangers feel like allies. He remembered birthdays, made people feel chosen at dinner tables, and moved through rooms as though he had reserved them in advance. Inside the family, he measured people by their usefulness and repaid loyalty only when it cost him nothing. When he left his first job at a hospitality firm after 8 months, I helped him write the pitch deck that launched his event promotion company. When his first major venue contract collapsed, I covered his studio rent for 4 months. When he needed seed capital to expand into corporate retreats, I introduced him to 2 investment contacts I had built over a decade as a forensic accountant. Every favor came back wrapped in the same promise. He would make it right when things stabilized. The ground was always shifting. The promises simply became more elaborate over time. Our grandfather had understood the dynamic before anyone in the family said it out loud. He passed away 7 years ago and left a mountain property called Cedar Ridge Lodge to Ryan and me in equal shares, with a legal requirement that both of our signatures be obtained before any financing, sale, or structural modification could be executed. Cedar Ridge sat on 40 acres outside a ski town in Colorado. It generated consistent income from corporate retreats, private events, and seasonal rentals. I managed the accounting and financial records. Ryan handled marketing and vendor relationships. That arrangement worked until he became engaged to Isabel Hartwell, a hotel acquisitions consultant whose family held significant real estate interests of their own. Isabel was measured, professional, and operating under the impression that Ryan had built his company without family subsidy. I did not dislike her. That made everything that followed considerably worse. 8 months before the wedding, I noticed an entry in the Cedar Ridge operating ledger that I had not approved. A commercial servicing fee listed under a lender I did not recognize, with a vague transaction description. I flagged it and asked Ryan directly. He said it was a short-term draw for lodge renovations we had discussed. I asked which discussion he meant. He sent a photograph of a planning document I had never seen before. When I requested the full loan file, he said the documents were with his business attorney and would take time to retrieve. My parents asked me to wait until after the next family dinner, because the pre-wedding months were already stressful for everyone. Then the lender responded to my formal records request. A commercial note for $220,000 secured against Cedar Ridge Lodge. My name listed as co-borrower. My electronic signature on the authorization page. I had not signed it. I had not seen it. I had not spoken with any lender about any Cedar Ridge loan. When I confronted Ryan privately, he did not attempt to deny the signature was his work. He told me the lodge needed capital improvements, his event company had a cash gap during the off-season, and Isabel's family had expected him to arrive at the engagement with cleaner financials than he actually had. He leaned against the kitchen counter with the ease of someone who had prepared for the conversation long before I arrived at it. "You co-own an asset worth over $1 million, he said. "I needed you to act like a co-owner." I told him that forging a co-owner's signature was not co-ownership. He told me I had always been too focused on process at the expense of the larger picture. That evening, my mother called and said Ryan had made an administrative error, that a signed ratification form would resolve cleanly and without legal involvement. My father sent a follow-up message pointing out that a formal dispute would generate legal fees, affect the lodge's lending relationships, and disrupt the wedding vendor timeline everyone had already committed to. I refused. 2 weeks after that, the 5 conditions arrived. I read the non-disclosure agreement carefully before I read anything else. On page 5, the language released Ryan, my parents, their associated business interests, and the lending institution from any claims arising from prior property or financial transactions. The public tribute was not about reconciliation. It was structured to establish on record that I considered Ryan a trustworthy partner before I could challenge the loan in any legal setting. The $20,000 contribution was sized to partially offset funds that had already been moved out of the lodge account. The joint ownership release would transfer sole control of Cedar Ridge to Ryan, permanently eliminating the co-signature requirement from every future transaction. Taken individually, the conditions looked like a difficult family making an unreasonable demand. Taken together, they were a coordinated legal strategy designed to neutralize me before I could act. They were not offering me attendance at a wedding. They were asking me to validate a fraud and then stand in the room while guests photographed the results. I sent everything to my attorney that night. Then I called my closest friend, Priya Nair. I had known Priya since graduate school, and she was the only person who had told me plainly, years earlier, that my habit of absorbing family crises was not generosity, but deference wearing generosity as a disguise. She listened without redirecting me once. When I finished, she asked me one question. "Are you trying to be believed, or are you trying to be protected?" I said I wanted both. She said I should probably decide which one came first. Protection came first. That night, I placed a fraud alert on every financial account I held, formally requested the complete loan documentation package, and instructed my attorney to notify the lender that my signature on the Cedar Ridge authorization was disputed. Then I booked the Aspen cabin. The trip was real. I needed physical distance from the wedding weekend and from the version of myself my family expected to produce on schedule. But the gift was already forming. Ryan had designed his reception to include a formal family tribute segment in which close relatives would offer toasts, present gifts, and share recorded messages before the dinner service began. He had sent me a personal request months earlier, asking for something meaningful that could be shown on the reception screen. He had called it a centerpiece moment for family unity. I decided to give him exactly what he asked for, a centerpiece, built with the same methodology I applied to financial investigations. 3 days later, I was in the Aspen cabin with Priya, working at a dining table covered in bank statements, property records, loan exhibits, and a color-coded transaction timeline. The mountains were visible through every window. I barely looked at them. The complete loan file arrived by secure transfer the following morning. My supposed electronic signature had been generated from an internet address registered to Ryan's event company headquarters. The identity verification answers had been supplied using details only immediate family would know. My first employer's name, the cross street nearest to our childhood home. The month our grandfather died, the lender had also received a copy of my driver's license as confirmation of identity. I remembered giving that copy to my mother 14 months earlier, when she said the family's insurance broker needed updated identification records from both of us. I called her. She said she did not know how Ryan had obtained it. Her answer arrived before I finished my sentence. Priya watched my face as I ended the call. "You don't believe her," she said. I told her I did not know what I believed anymore. That was the part no one thinks to warn you about. Discovering that someone has deceived you does not immediately produce clarity or courage. It produces a specific kind of contamination, in which every ordinary memory involving that person becomes suspect. I thought about the time my mother drove 3 hours to help me move after my divorce. I thought about Ryan calling me from a parking lot at 2 in the morning after his first major business loss. Not because he needed money that night, but because he needed to hear my voice. Good memories do not dissolve when a betrayal surfaces. They become evidence of how deeply the access ran. That felt worse than anything else. I traced the loan proceeds through the Cedar Ridge account line by line. $85,000 had moved directly to Ryan's event company operating account. $62,000 had transferred to an entity called Hartwell Consulting Partners. I recognized the name as a company connected to Isabel's family's hotel development portfolio. $38,000 had paid wedding venue deposits and vendor retainers. $24,000 had passed through my parents' financial planning practice before returning to Ryan's personal account, labeled as a family investment. The remainder had been absorbed by fees and overdue line items. The transfer into Isabel's family company troubled me most. The description on the transfer suggested a consulting retainer, but the timing aligned exactly with Ryan's engagement announcement. I did not yet know whether Isabel's family had been aware of the source of the funds or whether Ryan had used their business as a pass-through without their knowledge. Then Priya found the first turn. Inside a shared project folder Ryan had given me access to years earlier for lodge marketing work, she located a spreadsheet he had apparently forgotten was stored there. It showed the projected ownership structure of Cedar Ridge following the wedding. Ryan listed himself as sole managing owner. Isabel's family trust appeared as a future investment partner. Beside my name was a column labeled Buyout Resolved. The date on the file was 3 months before my parents emailed the 5 conditions. Next to my name, Ryan had written one note: "Will comply to preserve family access." I read that sentence 4 times. He had not hoped I would agree. He had calculated the probability based on my history and built his ownership model around the outcome. My years of protecting him from consequences had become a variable in his financial projections. Priya said nothing for almost a full minute. Then she told me to stop attempting to reach Ryan directly, because he had been modeling my responses for years, and giving him a new one would only help him recalibrate. We kept working. In a voice message thread I had archived from the previous winter, I found a recording Ryan had sent during a ski conference in Utah. At the time, I had listened once and dismissed it as a late-night ramble, after too much celebrating with clients. I played it again in the cabin. He talked about the lodge financing being nearly finalized, about our parents having managed the documentation piece, and about how once the wedding was formalized and the asset structure was filed, any objection I raised would be part of a shared liability too complicated for either party to benefit from challenging in court. His tone was relaxed, almost bored. At the end, he said, "She'll push back for a few weeks, and then she'll do what she always does." I played it a second time. I felt no satisfaction on the second listen. I felt something quieter and considerably less comfortable. Recognition. He was not wrong about the pattern. I had absorbed his consequences before and called it love and patience and family obligation. What I had never admitted was that absorbing consequences for someone who never intended to stop creating them was not love. It was a substitution for the confrontation I had been deferring since we were teenagers. That recording became the emotional center of what I built next. I did not want the presentation to be a performance of my humiliation. I wanted it to be a record. Not dramatic, not editorialized, not delivered with the language of personal grievance. Just dates, accounts, transfer amounts, and the identity of every person who had touched the decisions. Priya and I spent the next 2 days building a 10-minute documentary-style video using only documents that could be independently authenticated. No background music. No narration. Each frame showed a figure, a date, an account name, and its source. The final frame held one sentence: "A ceremony cannot consecrate trust that was manufactured through fraud." I also prepared 3 sealed envelopes. One addressed to Isabel contained the complete Cedar Ridge transaction history and a professional recommendation that she obtain independent financial counsel before any marital asset consolidation was executed. One addressed to my parents contained my attorney's formal preservation notice and a written record of every request I had made that they had redirected, delayed, or dismissed over the preceding 8 months. One addressed to Ryan contained a copy of the 5 conditions, my 3-word refusal, and a formal demand for full restitution and immediate restoration of the co-management structure specified in our grandfather's estate documents. On top of everything, I wrote a single note by hand. "You asked for a family tribute. This is the family record." Priya read the note and said it was surgical. I told her surgical was the only register I trusted myself to maintain. I still sat with the question for a long time, whether sending documented truth into a room with 320 people was justice, or whether it was punishment wearing justice as a coat. I did not arrive at a clean answer. What I knew was that every private conversation about the lodge had ended with pressure, a new deadline, or another document pushed toward me with the same expectation. Ryan's wedding was being used to build a public narrative of a family in harmony and a man of integrity. He had built the tribute segment specifically so that selected relatives would validate that narrative in front of everyone. My name was in the program. I decided to keep my slot. The logistics were simpler than I expected because Ryan had created them himself. His wedding coordinator had sent every participating family member a detailed ceremony schedule months in advance. My name appeared beside the final slot in the family tribute segment, labeled Sister's Reflection. My parents had apparently assumed I would complete the conditions before the Friday deadline. I emailed the coordinator and explained I would not attend in person, but would honor my scheduled contribution. I provided the video file, the courier tracking number for the box, and a written request that the sealed envelopes remain inside until Ryan opened it publicly as planned. The coordinator replied within 2 hours, confirming receipt of everything. She added that Ryan had personally approved my contribution as the closing piece of the tribute segment and had described it as a significant moment for the family. My attorney reviewed every item in the package before shipment. She also filed the formal signature dispute affidavit with the lender and requested an immediate freeze on any further credit draws against Cedar Ridge Lodge. We did not notify anyone at the wedding venue of the filing. Once the dispute report entered the lender's system, every guarantor listed on the note would receive automatic notification, and Ryan's access to the remaining credit line would be suspended without any further action required from me. At 8:47 the following morning, my father called without a greeting. "What did you tell the bank?" he said. I told him I had told them that my signature on the Cedar Ridge loan authorization was not mine. He said the timing was damaging to people who depended on the credit line to remain active. I asked when the damage to my credit, my co-ownership rights, and my identity had become less urgent than his calendar. He said, "This is not just about a signature." That sentence told me more than anything he said for the next 5 minutes. I asked directly whether he had known about the forgery before the conditions were sent. He was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then he said my mother had forwarded my license copy because Ryan had told her the paperwork was routine and that I had verbally approved the general concept of a lodge credit facility. I wrote the time of that admission on the notepad beside my coffee. "You gave him my identification," I said. He said parents sometimes made imperfect decisions when they believed the outcome would eventually be acceptable to everyone involved. I asked who had decided the outcome would be acceptable to me. He lowered his voice and offered a resolution. If I withdrew the bank dispute and arrived at the wedding without the package, he would personally guarantee that Ryan repaid me on a structured private schedule. I asked what form the written guarantee would take. He said, "My word, Maya." I ended the call. My mother's approach was different. She sent photographs over the following hour. Ryan and me building a snowman outside Cedar Ridge when I was 14. Ryan asleep on my shoulder during a long family drive when he was 9. The last photograph was our grandfather standing between us on the lodge porch with one hand on each of our shoulders. Below the photographs she wrote, "This is what you are choosing to destroy." I sat with those photographs longer than I planned to. Then I forwarded them with the rest of the documentation to my attorney and muted her number. Ryan called from an unknown number that evening. His first words were, "Tell me what you put in the box." When I did not answer immediately, he shifted to the version of the conversation I recognized from every previous disagreement. Measured tone, slightly wounded, space left open for me to step in and soften the situation. He said he knew I was upset. He said the lodge paperwork had moved faster than he had managed and he should have communicated better. He said Isabel's family could be affected if the investment trail became visible before the wedding. Then he said something I had been waiting to hear without knowing I was waiting for it. He said, You and I have always worked things out, Maya. That is what we do. I asked him to tell me in plain words whether he had signed my name on the Cedar Ridge loan authorization. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I did what the situation required. Priya, sitting across the cabin table, heard it on speaker and looked at the window. Ryan continued. He said I had financial stability, no mortgage exposure, no employees depending on my company's quarterly performance, and no engagement requiring me to appear credible to a new family's investment team. He said he had a business employing 12 people, a relationship that required him to present a certain profile, and a family reputation that affected everyone around him. One of us had the capacity to carry this, he said, and it was not going to be me. That was not a confession with remorse attached to it. That was arithmetic. I told him the package was already in transit and contained everything I had described to the lender. He said my name the way he had said it when we were children, and I was refusing to cover for something he had broken. The same flat, briefly disbelieving tone. He demanded to know the contents of the box. I told him it contained everything he had been certain I would keep private. He said my name once more, sharp and short. Then the line went quiet. After that call, I sat outside on the cabin steps for a long time. The air was cold enough to have weight. Priya brought coffee and did not offer commentary, because there was nothing accurate to say. I was not nervous. I was something closer to finished. The following afternoon, we settled into the property I had rented for the wedding weekend. I set up my laptop by the window that faced the mountain line. Ryan's wedding was roughly 900 miles away. The coordinator had sent a private stream link so I could watch the tribute segment in real time. At 6:15 that evening, she sent one message. Your package is on the presentation table. Ryan asked that yours be opened last. He still thought he could shape the ending. The live stream opened with a wide view of the reception hall. Long tables in cream linen, glass arrangements catching the chandelier light, a stage with a large monogram backdrop showing Ryan and Isabel's initials. 320 guests filling a room that had cost someone a significant sum to assemble. For the first 20 minutes, nothing of consequence happened. Toasts from Isabel's parents, a recorded tribute from Ryan's college roommate. My aunt presented a framed photograph of our grandfather at Cedar Ridge. My parents gave a short speech about how proud they were of the man Ryan had become. Neither of them looked toward the stream camera. Ryan stood beside Isabel, looking precisely as comfortable as someone who believed the room was aligned with his interests. When the MC reached the final item on the tribute list, my mother leaned toward Ryan and said something close to his ear. He shook his head once. The MC smiled at the wide shot and said, Our last presentation tonight comes from Ryan's sister, Maya, who is joining us from Colorado and was unable to be here in person, but sent something she describes as a complete family record. A ripple moved through the guests. Ryan stood before the box, reached the presentation table. My sister and I have been working through some old misunderstandings, he said, using the warm, practiced tone he used when he needed a room to believe something quickly. Family is complicated, but what matters is that we are still here. Applause followed. My father did not applaud. The box was carried to the table. Polished cedar-colored wood, white ribbon, the appropriate weight of something considered. Ryan glanced at the stream camera. Then he smiled the way he smiled when he was certain of an outcome. Whatever she sent, he said. I receive it. He opened the lid. On top was an 8x10 photograph of the two of us on the Cedar Ridge porch, maybe 15 and 12 years old, squinting into summer light. Below the photograph was a sealed envelope printed with 2 words in capital letters. Read aloud. He smiled at the envelope. He expected an apology. He handed it to the MC because that was what the tribute format called for. The MC unfolded the single page inside. His expression changed by the 3rd line. Ryan reached for it. The microphone had already carried the opening into the room. To my brother. You offered me 5 conditions in exchange for permission to attend your wedding. I declined, because a signature, obtained through coercion, carries no legal weight, and neither does a relationship built on the same principle. The room went completely still. Isabel straightened in her chair. Ryan said, Turn it off. The MC looked at the coordinator. Then the screen behind the stage changed. The tribute video had been scheduled to begin automatically at the slot listed. In the official program, using a file the coordinator had confirmed receipt of in writing. The first frame showed Ryan's 5 conditions exactly as his assistant had forwarded them. The second frame highlighted the language on page 5, releasing all parties from prior property and financial claims. Guests leaned forward. Isabel's father put on his reading glasses. Ryan moved toward the AV station. The coordinator stepped in front of him and stated clearly that the presentation had been submitted and approved under his own written instructions and could not be interrupted without his written authorization on the same letterhead. The third frame appeared: Cedar Ridge Lodge. Loan amount: $220,000. Disputed signature. Internet address: registered to Ryan's company office building. Isabel turned in her chair to look at him directly. "Why is your office address on Maya's authorization?" she said. Ryan said the document had been presented without context. The fourth frame showed the full transfer chart: $85,000 to his event company, $38,000 to wedding deposits, $62,000 to Hartwell Consulting Partners. Isabel's father stood up from his chair. "That is a company in my family's portfolio," he said, addressing the room without looking away from the screen. "I need to understand how those funds originated." Ryan said the lodge financing had included a bridge investment component that had been structured for flexibility. Her father picked up his phone. Then the recording played. Ryan's own voice, relaxed and slightly elevated from a winter evening at altitude, filled the reception hall. "Once the wedding structure is filed, her objections become part of a shared liability that isn't worth challenging. She'll push back for a few weeks and then do what she always does." His laugh followed. The specific sound of someone who had never planned to hear himself played back in a room he had rented. Isabel pushed her chair back from the table. She did not stand immediately. She sat very still and looked at the screen, not at Ryan. He said her name. She did not turn. My mother hurried toward the stage and told the guests the recording had been taken out of context, and that the full situation was more complex than a single file could represent. My father took the microphone from the MC and asked for patience while a private family matter was resolved. Isabel's father said, $62,000 moved into my company from a disputed loan, and you are asking the room for patience. Ryan moved toward Isabel and said the investment had been a good faith arrangement, that his liquidity had been temporarily constrained, and that he had intended to disclose the source of the funds after the wedding. She asked him to repeat the last part. He said he had planned to tell her after they were married. The final frame appeared on the screen. This presentation has also been delivered to the lending institution and to independent legal counsel. No one in this room is being asked to choose a side. You are being asked to look at the record. The video ended on a plain black frame. No photograph of me, no signature, just the date. Isabel stood up. She asked Ryan 3 questions without raising her voice above its normal register. Whether my name had been placed on a loan without my knowledge. Whether the Hartwell transfer had been disclosed to her family before it was made. Whether he had planned to tell her any of this before they signed a marriage license. He answered the first question by saying the situation was more nuanced than the documents suggested. He answered the second by describing investment disclosures as standard operational practice. He did not answer the third. Isabel picked up the sealed envelope addressed to her from the presentation table and walked off the stage. Her father followed. My father approached the microphone again and told the guests that Maya's history of opposing Ryan's professional decisions was well documented and provided necessary context for what they had seen. The coordinator received a message on her tablet. It was from Isabel's attorney, who had traveled with the family to the venue. The message asked whether I was available via the stream connection. I had not planned to appear. I had built the package to speak without me. But I thought about every family conversation in which the conclusion had been reached before I entered the room and in which my absence had been described as my agreement. I accepted the connection. My face appeared on the side panel of the reception screen. The room quieted in a different way than it had before. Ryan looked at me the way he had looked at me across the kitchen counter the night I confronted him about the ledger entry. Calculated and very still, Isabel's attorney asked 3 questions. Had I authorized the Cedar Ridge Lodge loan? No. Had I approved any transfer of funds to Hartwell Consulting Partners? No. Had I designed the package to cancel the wedding? No, I had. disputed my signature, and disclosed the source of the funds in the package. What people chose to do with the information was their decision, not mine. Ryan said I had chosen a deliberately disruptive timing and that I had spent years resenting his success from behind the cover of accounting details. I told him he was right about one thing. I had chosen a public setting. I had done it because every private setting over the preceding 8 months had produced another deadline, another document, and another version of the conversation engineered to end with my compliance. You wanted a family tribute on that screen, I said. You built the entire segment around the idea that I would validate you in front of everyone here. I gave you the documents instead. My father instructed the AV technician to cut the stream connection. Isabel's attorney said, "Let her finish." I looked at my parents. I asked my mother whether she had forwarded my driver's license to Ryan. She looked at the table in front of her. I asked my father whether he had read the release document before demanding that I sign it. He said his attorney had reviewed it. I asked whether his attorney had confirmed that the release covered all prior property claims, not just wedding-related behavior. He said, "The intention was to prevent unnecessary litigation." That sentence traveled through the room the way admissions do when the people who made them hear the words said back in a public space for the first time. My aunt turned to my mother and said, "You knew this was never about how Maya behaved at the wedding." My mother began crying. She said the family had been afraid that if the dispute went forward, Ryan's company, the lodge's credit line, and Isabel's family's investment would all surface simultaneously and could not be managed separately. I answered, "So the resolution was to make sure I was the only one who faced what could not be managed." No one contradicted me. Ryan then said the thing that removed whatever remained of the room's willingness to be patient with him. He said, "You were always the one who could handle it, Maya. That is not an insult. That is just how families work." He said it the way someone delivers a fact they have never examined because it has always served them. Isabel had come back to the doorway of the hall to retrieve her coat. She stopped walking when she heard it. Ryan continued. He said I had a stable income, no mortgage exposure, no staff dependent on quarterly performance, and no engagement that required me to appear financially credible to a new family's investment leadership. He said absorbing the lodge. Debt would have cost me less than it would have cost him to appear insolvent. Isabel walked back to the presentation table. She picked up the envelope addressed to her. She looked at Ryan for a long time. Then she said, "You used her credit to fund your company and hid the source from my family so they would invest with you. And your explanation is that she could handle it." Ryan said marriage required a partner who supported you through complicated periods. She said, "This is not a complicated period. This is a calculation." I ended the connection. What reached me through messages over the following 2 hours told the rest. Isabel left the venue with her parents and their attorney. Her father placed an immediate call to his financial team to trace every transaction touching the Hartwell Consulting Partners account. The lender suspended the Cedar Ridge credit line and sent formal notification to all guarantors listed on the note, which included my parents. Ryan's event company lost 2 corporate clients before the reception dinner was served because those clients had been in the room and had photographed the transfer chart on the screen. The venue required settlement of the remaining balance before the evening ended. The card Ryan presented drew from the lodge account, which had been frozen and was declined. My father paid the remaining venue balance from his personal account to prevent a dispute from becoming a public record that same evening. Ryan stayed in the suite alone until checkout. He did not call me. I did not celebrate. I closed the laptop and walked onto the cabin deck. The sky was clear and the mountains held their shapes against the dark without any help from me. Priya came outside and stood beside me. She did not tell me I had done the right thing because she understood I was not asking that question. I had wanted the truth to reach the people it concerned. I had not expected that watching it arrive would feel so much like finishing a task you spent years preparing for, and then discovering the preparation had always been the harder part. The investigation ran for 9 months. The lender's digital forensics team confirmed that the electronic signature had been generated using a device registered to Ryan's company during business hours from the static IP address connected to his office building. The identity verification answers had been supplied from a document my mother forwarded to Ryan's email 4 days before the authorization was submitted. My parents avoided criminal referral by cooperating fully with the lender's review and providing complete records of every communication they had received from Ryan throughout the process. Cooperation did not shield them from the financial consequences. Their financial planning practice had received $24,000 through the loan transfer, which the lender categorized as participation in an unauthorized draw. They settled by liquidating a significant portion of their retirement portfolio. My father resigned from 2 professional advisory boards after the dispute appeared in the lender's public filings. My mother cut contact with 3 family members who declined to describe the situation as Maya overreacting. Ryan's event company dissolved within 4 months. The corporate clients who had photographed the transfer chart declined to renew their contracts, and the information moved through the events industry the way it tends to move when the story involves someone's name on a document they did not sign. Isabel terminated the engagement. Her family's legal team recovered the full Hartwell transfer through a settlement that required Ryan to repay the amount with interest before any other claim could proceed. She sent me one message after the settlement was finalized. She thanked me for the documentation. She said she wished she had known earlier, not because it would have changed the outcome, but because she would have asked different questions sooner. I believed her. I did not become part of her life. Some conclusions. Do not need a new relationship attached to them. Ryan accepted a criminal plea agreement covering fraud and identity misuse. He received a suspended sentence, a restitution order substantial enough to follow him for years, and supervised release. He also signed a court order transferring management of Cedar Ridge into a supervised trust until the loan debt was fully resolved. I became the interim manager, not as a prize, and not because I wanted to hold ownership over him, because someone had to rebuild the financial records and restore the vendor relationships that had gone quiet during the dispute. Within 14 months, Cedar Ridge was operating at full capacity again. I used a portion of my management compensation to establish a small fund for people navigating financial disputes involving family members and limited access to legal resources. It gave the entire experience a purpose that extended beyond the accounting. My relationship with my parents did not rebuild. They wrote letters, they sent cards on holidays, they asked me to consider mediation. I agreed to one session. During it, my father said they had always believed I was the most capable person in the family. I told him that capability was not permission to assign someone else's consequences without asking. My mother asked whether the public presentation had been necessary. I answered honestly. It was not the only method available. I could have allowed my attorney to manage everything through private filings and let the legal process move without an audience. But private filings had been the environment that protected the pattern for years. Ryan had constructed the tribute segment deliberately so that my cooperation would be witnessed by 320 people and a live stream audience. He had needed the room to see me agree. I used the same room to show them the record instead. I was not sorry about that decision. I was sorry that we had all arrived at a reception hall before any of us had arrived at the conversation that might have stopped it. Ryan contacted me once after sentencing. No greeting in the message. He wrote, "You took everything from me." I replied with 4 words. I kept what was mine. Then I blocked the number. On the 1-year anniversary of the canceled wedding, I drove to Cedar Ridge alone. I walked the property in the early morning before the staff arrived. The mountain light at that hour does something to the lodge that no photograph accurately captures. Our grandfather had known that. He had chosen this place deliberately and left it to both of us for a reason. I sat on the porch with the photograph that had been sitting on top of the package. Ryan and me at perhaps 15 and 12, standing on this same porch, squinting into summer light with no idea what the property would eventually cost us to share. For a moment, I missed the brother in that photograph. Then I understood that missing who someone was does not require rebuilding the door they burned down on their way out. I had not mailed a threat. I had mailed a record. The terror in that room had come from recognition. Ryan had structured his entire future around the calculation that I would absorb the cost quietly because I always had. When that calculation failed, everything he had built on top of it failed at the same time. Some people called what I did revenge. Others called it accountability. I think it was both, and I think the difference between them matters. Revenge ends at the humiliation. Accountability continues through the restitution, the investigation, and the long work of rebuilding what the decisions damaged. So, let me ask you something before you go. If your family handed you a list of conditions and told you to sign away your rights or lose your seat at their table, would you put the record in front of the room, or would you let the legal system speak privately while you walked away? Think about it honestly. All names, events, and characters in this story are fictional and created for reflection and entertainment. We hope it reminds you that when someone counts on your silence to protect their plans, staying silent is not loyalty. It is participation.